Hi there, this is your moderator, Lori Dearman, and you are in the right place for how to jumpstart your mobile learning strategy. I'd like to extend a warm welcome from Ventura, California to today's webinar, sponsored by CGS and hosted by WebAttract, the leader in thought leadership webinars. In just a moment, I'll be introducing our panel of thought leaders, as today's webinar is about hearing from these mobile learning experts as they discuss the top 3 ways to use mobile to impact the bottom line. Today we have a diverse audience of professionals from across the United States, all interested in reducing training and delivery costs, leveraging existing corporate assets, and ensuring workplace acceptance from execs all the way down to millennials. Before today's webinar, we asked each of you to tell us a bit about what you'd like to learn from today's webinar. And as expected from learning professionals, many of you weighed in. Thank you so much for your input, and I think you'll find that our speakers will address your requests throughout the program. I would like to go to our first poll. So coming up on your screen is that poll, and we'd like to hear from you. Where are you in terms of embracing mobile learning? Are you in the gathering information stage, piloting a program, maybe already committed to a full-blown strategy, or have already it's already a standard part of your learning approach? So we'd like to know where you're at. All right, it looks like 69% of us in that gathering information stage, 10% already piloting a program, with 5% saying committed to a full-blown strategy, and 16% already a standard part of our learning approach. So very nice spread, and I think there will be something for everyone. So thank you so much for the input. At this point, it does give me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker for today, John Moxley. Now, John is an award-winning talent development executive with over 25 years of experience in organizational development, formerly Director of Leadership Development for Cricket Communications Incorporated. John was responsible for Cricket University, Cricket's Leadership Development Program, and mobile learning. So John, welcome to the webinar. How are you today?
I'm great, Laurie. I have to tell you, I'm speaking from inside the polar vortex here in Chicago, Illinois. So it's a cold day to talk about a hot topic.
Well, I hope you're staying warm. And folks, John is going to get us started today by helping to address some of the common myths about mobile learning. So over to you, John.
Thanks, Laurie. Well, I think one of the biggest myths is that mobile learning really is another way to deliver e-learning on a mobile device. And I think that when you think about it that way, you're really limiting the capability that mobile learning has to do much more. So I want to take a moment and just talk about some of the other capabilities that come with mobile learning. Of course, it gives you the ability to deliver learning anywhere, anytime, especially given the fact that people keep their mobile device close to them, usually within arm's length or in their pocket or on their hip. So it's very convenient for people, much more so than a typical PC, even a laptop. In addition, it gives you quick access. For many people, going to a computer involves going in another room if they work on a sales floor, or it involves launching an application. But typically, people can access mobile content directly from their phone in a matter of seconds. So it's really quick to access. And it's more likely people will use it for reference purposes than they would necessarily PC unless they're working at a desktop all day. A third benefit of it is remote assessments. We've used mobile learning in conjunction with instructor-led training to be able to do online assessments. And it's very convenient because of the fact that you can have people in a classroom complete a course in the afternoon and then have them open up a phone and take the assessment right then and there before they leave. If it were an online assessment done on a PC, it would take longer to actually do that, or we'd have to equip a classroom to do that. So we find it's very useful for assessments and surveys. In addition, one of the things that make it unique are the ability to send out reminders before learning, as well as sending out reinforcement after learning. And we do that through SMS messaging and other kinds of notifications. So that ability to support the learning process is really unique and a powerful tool once it's used properly. Another example that people often don't think about is actually attending webinars via a mobile device. So there are a number of tools out there like GoToWebinar and GoToTraining that allow you to actually attend webinars using a tablet or a phone and actually be able to be out in the field attending webinars. So it's not limited to self-paced content that you might access when you want. You can also attend events like this. And then the last piece I'd mention is the ability to actually see how-tos and demos that are video-based. And that could be live action of demonstrations on how to provide customer service or do practice selling skills, but it also could be systems training, captures of Captivate simulations of software systems. And it turns out that mobile devices today are really geared toward delivering video very efficiently, in part based on the popularity of tools like YouTube for delivering video. So networks are designed to deliver video, devices are designed today to deliver video easily, so it's a great way to allow people to watch instead of read. So those are just some of the ways in which it can be used.
So, John, it looks like there are many applications, certainly for mobile learning, but I'm wondering, what do you see as the biggest benefit to the business?
Well, I'd say that there are several benefits. The first thing that comes to mind, of course, is cost reduction. Number one, when you can push content out or make it available to people out in the field, then you don't have to necessarily travel instructors to a classroom. You don't have to even travel students to a classroom. So there's the cost reduction from travel expenses as well as the lost opportunity costs. People don't have to spend time traveling. They can step out of the workplace easily, pull up an event and attend that way. In addition, the devices themselves are very inexpensive compared to computers, and most people have a smartphone today. So in many cases, there is no infrastructure cost to enable mobile learning. So cost reduction is number one. Number two, as I mentioned earlier, you can use that mobile device to make people aware of upcoming training. You can remind them when training is due. You can reinforce training after it's been done and ask people to apply what they learned. So it's a very powerful change management tool to get people to adopt what they've learned, apply it in the workplace, and build habits that result in changes in behavior and real business impact. And that's the third piece. It's a tool for enabling behavioral change. And traditionally, e-learning often focuses on knowledge transfer, but doesn't necessarily address the behavioral change aspect. But mobile has a number of different capabilities that can influence changing behaviors, which is really what I think is the most important benefit, and we'll show some examples of that.
Fantastic. So let's go ahead and switch our focus and take a moment to discuss the benefits to the learner. So as they say, the WIFM, what's in it for me from the learner's side?
Well, our experience with our learners has been that, number one, they really enjoy the convenience. Stepping away to take training or to look up information is much less disruptive when that information is available to them right on their own phone. It's also great if they can use that device to search for content in a knowledge management system or just search for content on the web. So number one is convenience. Secondly, I think that the actual content itself can be more engaging and effective. So we talked about the ability to deliver rich media, which in most cases means video. And since those devices are so good at delivering video, especially with the high resolution screens that are available now, we know users prefer to watch rather than read. And it provides a great platform for doing just that. The other nice thing about this is that it doesn't require people to change their habits. Most people are already attuned to using their mobile phone throughout the day. They're used to looking at text messages that come in on their phone. In fact, the average time for people to look at a text message after it's hit their phone is approximately 20 seconds. So we're not asking them to do things differently than what they do today. They're used to using a device, and we're simply leveraging that device more effectively. So I think those two things are the things that are most important. And then in addition, there's the ability to, as I mentioned earlier, drive behavioral change. And we'll look at some examples of how it can enable that, where I think is the biggest impact.
So, John, I know that you have quite a bit of experience rolling out and using mobile for content delivery and performance support. So why don't we take a moment to walk through some examples of how you've done that, and for the benefit of anyone who might not be familiar with Cricut, the case example we'll be using today, can we start with a brief overview?
Sure, I'll keep it very brief. So Cricut is a wireless provider. They're very similar to Verizon or Sprint. They provide devices, network coverage, they have rate plans, they sell through a series of retail outlets. This past year, Cricut was acquired by AT&T, but the projects I'm talking about were designed to meet the needs of a wireless organization with many stores across the country, about 15,000 users. The other thing to keep in mind is that in the wireless industry, there's a regular turnover of devices. New phones are coming out all the time. There are also changes in terms of offerings, rate plans, family plans, and so on. So there's a need for regular, frequent training, and we simply couldn't, in our situation, afford to pull people out of the workplace every month to deliver that amount of training. So we needed something that would allow us to take the training to them in a way that was very convenient. And of course, as a wireless company, it was kind of a natural fit to use that technology. I talked a little bit about behavior change, and I just want to emphasize this because I think this is really important in terms of understanding mobile's potential. Traditionally, we look at learning as focused on knowledge acquisition or knowledge transfer. And quite frankly, a lot of e-learning programs out there are focused just on that. But we know to get real business impact, we have to do more than just impart knowledge. We have to influence people's attitudes. We have to build skills. And most importantly, we have to turn those skills into habits, behaviors that people do on a regular basis. So the capabilities for mobile allow us to do that by sending out reminders to do the things that you know how to do. It allows us to prompt people to do follow-up practice activities very easily. We can send messages direct to their phone and remind them to do those kinds of things. We also use it to refresh knowledge. So sometimes we find that we'll deliver training in preparation for a launch, but after the launch, which might be a month or so later, we want to just refresh on some of the key points. And mobile is a great way to do that in a matter of minutes. It's also a great tool for providing feedback. So a lot of times users don't get enough feedback on their behavior, and there are now mobile capabilities to actually practice things like selling techniques and customer service language, be able to record that, and then provide feedback to that individual based on their behaviors. So these abilities to actually influence behavior through the means of mobile technology allows us to create a bigger business impact than if we just focus on knowledge transfer. So some examples of what we've done at Cricut include building a mobile catalog of content based on content we already had. So we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. We took a look at the content that was most popular to our target audience of about 15,000 users, and we took that content and put it into a catalog organized by category and also searchable. So the first thing we did was take existing content and make it more readily available. We also built online assessments. We used text messaging for reminders and for reinforcement. We then used mobile technology to support our onboarding process. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but basically we now run onboarding in a strictly mobile fashion in a virtual environment. We also use it to give people opportunities to practice skills and get some real-time feedback from their boss or the instructor. And we also do the refreshes and in online games, and I'll show you some examples of that as well. So we've been using it in a variety of ways. On the topic of games, I bet quite a few of the people on this call have heard about gamification, which is something that's moved into the learning space over the last year or so. We've actually been doing some work in gamification using our mobile platform. At Cricut, we actually use a platform that's app-based, and it allows us to create content and in many cases repurpose existing content and put it into a game format, which would include assigning point values and enabling people to track their progress and see how the leaders are doing. So here's some examples of what that looks like. And these are all screen grabs from different devices that have been used by users in cricket. So on the left side, you actually see that we have a game and we have a progress bar. So this gray area indicates that I've made some progress on the game. I haven't completed it yet. A little hard to see, but over here on a real screen, it's easy to see that I have the potential to score 5,250 points in this game. I've so far accumulated 1,000 points. And over here is a bonus section, which we use to incent people to actually complete their learning earlier. So if they complete assignments earlier, they get bonus points, and that allows them to actually acquire that knowledge and begin to apply it even sooner. So we think that's a great benefit and a great incentive from using games. Here you see what a game actually looks like from a user perspective. Each of these items here represent activities in the game, and each of them has point values. And if I completed these, my completion points would be shown in green. So it's very simple for a user to go through each of these items in turn, complete the activity, and acquire the points. And in our scheme, when you reach certain levels, you actually acquire badges, and the top point winners actually are awarded trophies and so on. So this is the simplicity of the interface. Over on the right side, you see that these are screens that actually are inside an individual module. So for example, in Module 2 of our 4G LTE course, they have the potential to earn 800 points. The course topic is coverage, sales, and competition. And then they simply swipe to go through the content, and then after that, they'll take a quick test typically. To make the game more engaging, we created an animated character, which we called the Nemesis. And he kind of challenged the user throughout the game, and sometimes even taunted them a little bit. So it added some personality to the game. We also had another character who was more supportive, more of a friend to the user and encouraging to the user. But this ability to add some personality into the learning experience made it much more engaging and much more popular for our folks. So these are just some of the simple things that we did using gamification. The other thing I just want to mention is that we've used games in a number of different ways, and what we've discovered is that while people like to score points individually and try and get to the top of the leaderboard individually, what really motivates them often is playing as a part of a team. So we set up our game so that, in our case, we had stores compete against other stores in the same market, say Chicago. And we found that people were much more engaged in playing on behalf of their store and helping their teammates learn. So we found team play was very effective and a very strong motivator for our employees. Now, another thing that mobile is well suited for is extending the learning process. So typically in the past, when we do learning in a training environment, corporate environment, it used to consist of one or multi-day courses. So big events followed by maybe a test at the end. Mobile is ideally suited for small steps. Some people call it micro-learning. But the point being that you take that same content, you break it down into small pieces, and you allow people to actually complete those pieces spread out over time. So, of course, that might have been a 4-hour course in the past, might be a 2-week course broken into short segments throughout each week. So the benefit of this spacing and repetition is that it increases retention. And there's lots of cognitive psychology and learning studies that demonstrate this spacing effect, as they call it. So when you space content out and you provide opportunity for reinforcement of that content, people remember it longer, and they tend to apply it back in the workforce or workplace more than they would if they simply went to a one-day event. So the ability to extend the learning process and break it into convenient activities that can be fit in throughout the day creates what we think is a real lasting effect. And that's something that I think is very unique in terms of using mobile learning as a format for changing behaviors. Another reinforcement example I want to share with you is how we build on a traditional workshop and then use mobile learning to reinforce that content. So in this case, we had a course called Supercharge Your Career. And it was really an employee development opportunity that enabled them to work on accelerating their career development. So in this program, we started with a half-day workshop, and folks attended that workshop. As soon as they completed the workshop, they then were assigned a series of activities. So the first activity they saw the next day was a short video that summarized many of the points that were covered in the workshop. It was about 3.5 minutes long, very easy for them to follow. Once they viewed the video, they then were sent a very short knowledge test. And in fact, in many cases, it was just one question. But the point of this was that it caused the learner to think about and process what they had just seen and come up with the right answer. So testing their knowledge is a great learning activity. After that, we pushed out a reinforcement of the key points using SMS or text messaging. So those key things we wanted them to remember, they saw the day after. Then we gave them a review checklist. So they would review the things that they should do, and they had a checklist that they could keep and refer to later on. And then they actually got a reminder to go out and actually practice what they learned. So we gave them an assignment to go out and practice, and if they wanted, they could actually come back into an online discussion on their phone and tell other people what their experiences were like, what worked and what didn't work. And then the last thing they would do is complete a survey. So as you can see, a lot of what we did was reinforcing something that was done in a traditional way in order to get them to apply what they've learned and space out the learning process so they'd have higher levels of retention and more application and behavior change back on the job. So what about results? Here are a few different metrics that I want to share with you. In terms of the overall completion status, the question here is, do people actually complete this kind of learning? And a lot of this data is from the use of mobile learning for our retail onboarding process, which is a 3-day completely virtual training program. Our completion percentages for this program were over 92%. So we found that people did stay engaged and actually enjoyed the process. When we asked them to rate the mobile training in the retail onboarding program on a scale from 1 to 10, they gave it an average score of 9.7, which we thought was great. So they actually liked the experience as well. We also ran a number of tests, including a mastery test at the end of the program, and the average scores were typically around 87% correct across all groups, and we're testing about 200 people a week. So we have pretty solid data on all of this. So we felt that they're actually retaining what they learned in terms of the knowledge tests that we had them complete. And then the last thing, which also relates to satisfaction, is what we call a Net Promoter Score. And Net Promoter, for those who may not be familiar with it, is a means of measuring customer satisfaction. We decided, since the business was already using it to measure customer sat, we would use it to apply to learner satisfaction. In many cases, Net Promoter scores above, say, 30 are considered very good across industries. We had a score of 74, and we were a little nervous at first about what our scores might end up being. Turns out people really like it. They would recommend it to other people, and so that made us feel good. So they're completing the training, they're passing the tests, and they're enjoying the experience. The other two things I want to point out is that using mobile learning represented a significant reduction in our delivery costs compared to instructor-led training. In our organization, we have a lot of people in small markets, and we couldn't justify traveling instructors to those markets on a monthly basis, let alone a weekly basis. So there was a huge reduction in cost. Secondly, we actually compared the same content delivered in a mobile virtual environment versus in a traditional instructor-led format. So in some markets, we tried out the instructor-led format in the larger markets. And we made that comparison. We found that the difference in results across all these metrics that I showed you up above were very small, less than 5%. The users had a slight preference for instructor-led training in a classroom, and I think there's some social aspects of the classroom that are really positive that are part of that. But when you look at it in terms of their satisfaction, how much they learned, how many of those folks completed the courses. There was very little difference between the mobile group and the ILT group. And as a result, we decided to go to a completely mobile virtual way of delivering retail onboarding to new hires in the company. So those are some of the results that we got at Cricket Wireless. So with this, I think I'll turn it back to Lori.
Okay, well, thank you so much, John. Fantastic. Folks, I did see a question come in from Lori asking what NPS stands for. It's Net Promoter Score. Thought I'd just answer that for you while we were on the page. All right, and at this point, I would like to bring on our second presenter today, Micah White. And Micah White is Director of Research and Development at CGS Learning. His primary research focus is advanced technology for the authoring, publishing, and visualization of multimedia and interactive learning content. Micah, it's great to have you. How are you today?
Hey, Lori. Glad to be here.
I hope you're not suffering in the polar vortex.
No, no, not just yet. But I'm in Canada, so the polar vortex is here most of the year.
Ah, very true. Well, folks, for anyone who may have joined late today, we did just hear from John Moxley as he helped to dispel some common myths about mobile learning, shared with us a variety of applications as well as some results. We're going to turn our attention right now to Micah White, who will share a Comcast case study. And though Comcast is a company that probably doesn't need much in the way of an introduction, we're going to go ahead and get started with a brief overview and what their learning and their business goals were. So over to you, Micah.
Okay. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. So, yes, CGS and Comcast have been working on e-learning solutions, 8+ years, and really glad to bring to you today this mobile learning case study. Comcast a number of years ago found the industry at a crossroads. What they wanted to do was transformational change. They wanted to update their e-learning so that all devices could consume the content. So very exciting case study. They actually delivered mobile device agnostic content to over 130,000 of their employees. So they will just dig right in. So, as Lori said, Comcast, one of the biggest telecommunications providers, soon to be, the biggest, definitely doesn't need too much of an introduction. They have over, 120, close to 130,000 employees, everything from technicians to people that work in their call centers, people working in sales, and all these different groups within their organization. They've got 22 million subscribers, and they're expected to grow to 30 million. Just to give you a sense how big Comcast is, and we know that they're big, over 1.2 million people applied for a job with Comcast last year alone. So Comcast was responding to the market, and a lot of their services and a lot of their products were pivoting and changing. They were reimagining the future of entertainment. With that, they wanted to transform their employee base. They wanted their employees to absolutely have the most up-to-date information about their products. And we're talking about an industry that changes, week to week, day to day. So they wanted to give the very latest information, and they actually wanted to enable all employees in their organization to be able to sell. They wanted a selling transformational change. Looking at Comcast and their e-learning, Comcast is a very large university. They are a top shelf, learning and development organization. They are always seeking out innovation. They are innovating themselves. CGS learned a lot from Comcast. So they're a leader in innovative training. They have a large LMS infrastructure. A lot of the e-learning was mostly desktop-based up until this point, and that was critical. With their product consolidation, they were looking at the X1 entertainment operating system being the central hub in the living room, and all their products and services were being sold or were being funneled through X1. So if you had Xfinity Voice, if you had Xfinity TV, Internet, their home security. And with that, they really needed the employees to know what were the big three things about their products. How would the employees speak about their products? If somebody said to any employee of Comcast, what exactly is X1? in the elevator, at a barbecue, out on the street. They wanted their employee base to be able to respond with like the really simple, biggest three things. So they wanted a learning program that could be consumed anywhere. If you were in the office, if you were on the subway, if you were out in the field, if you were a technician who was pulling up in the truck to someone's home, they wanted to be able to have that information quickly at their disposal. And they also wanted you to be able to practice so that you could try to, as you learned and went through the different tiers of learning, you'd actually be able to practice what you've come to understand and get some feedback on that. Where things began, a lot of the sales enablement information was brochure-based, whether it's a PDF document or literally a printout that you put in the truck. And things were changing so quickly, new information coming so fast, that there was no way that this was tenable. What was new this quarter may be different next quarter. The focus was always shifting. They're operating in a hyperkinetic, extremely, innovative field, and there's new products, new things coming out all the time. So what they wanted to do was be able to leverage mobile devices to be able to instantly consume training that would replace all of this, out-of-date sales information. So here was the big three of this mobile platform. The first one was that they wanted to mobilize all of the learning. They wanted you to be able to access, via an iPad, via phone, so like a tablet profile, a phone profile, and they also wanted to service all of their existing desktops that they have. And something that's common with big organizations, they don't have the latest internet browsers. So they had it was like a tall glass of water. You had to support all the old, but then you also had to support all the new. And the new meant, a fragmented ecosystem of different devices, Android devices of all different types, iOS devices, tablet devices. So that was a big goal. They wanted to drive a consistency. When you went to take this training, you took one project, and it was device agnostic. They wanted to drive user acceptance. They wanted people to be able to use the content at any point. If you wanted to brush up on something when you were traveling from office to office, if you were going out to visit a customer, if you were about to go on a shift on the phone, they wanted to work the phone. They wanted you to be able to consume this content. And then the third thing was that they wanted to address the entire learning life cycle. They wanted the education to be broken up and put into tiers so that it was easy to understand where you were and where it was you're going. They didn't want a big monolithic board of squares to click on. They wanted people to really feel comfortable. So they broke the content into an easy to understand, easy to digest sort of tiered system. Let's have a look at that. The mobile portal, being device agnostic, you can see on your screen here, there's some actual screenshots from the content. We've got desktop content, we've got iPad content, and then we've got phone-based content. And they're all being, deployed from a single place. They broke the training up into 3 different tiers of information. The first was the Know the Basics. The Know the Basics was entry level, so if you were coming to understand for the first time, you would go. And in that Know the Basics, you would get the big 3 features and benefits that the product had. They really wanted everybody in the organization to know those big 3. If you knew nothing else, you ought to know the big 3. So that's what Know the Basics covered. Then they had the product growth, which just started sort of adding the sales nomenclature. They had different processes and signature selling method that they like to have. And then finally they had the product positioning tier. After you learn the basics, after you learned a bit about the selling process and how they wanted you to do that, then you could actually practice it, and you could actually go in and apply the knowledge that you had learned and actually get feedback on how you were doing. So that was the 3-prong approach. It worked really well because putting a Know the Basics in there at the front really didn't scare anybody off. If they started with doing a bunch of simulation stuff, that might be intimidating for someone who's just starting out. So worked very well. Here's an example of some of that simulation. This is actually a snapshot from iPad. So you can see you've got a customer scenario up on the screen. You can go and you tap on or press. So if you're on the desktop, you click with your mouse. If you're on the iPad, you tap with your finger, and you'll be able to go through different sorts of simulations that would let you go through the process and then give you feedback. Just a quick aside. This approach was built using what they call a local record store that allows you to do learning from anywhere. It's disconnected from their LMS, but what CGS was able to do was actually do a roll-up so that all of these records and completions could go into the LMS. So you had a true disconnected learning and a proxy, and that was able to allow all devices everywhere to consume the content, even if you didn't have an internet connection. So what happened with the deployment? Comcast delivered 6,000 iPhones to its staff and 15,000 iPads. They made this product knowledge available to workers at their desk and in the field. So they were able to gather some great statistics and metrics. You've got a sample up here up on the screen. They were able to gather some great information about how their learning is being used.
All fantastic information today, Micah. I know many folks here are keenly interested as well in the metrics. So I'm wondering, what can you share with us around results from incorporating a mobile strategy?
Absolutely. 80% of the global employee workforce successfully completed a mission-critical course within 3 months. So we watched that statistic grow. It was great. Out of the 130,000 employees, 80% successfully finished and took that training within 3 months, and they did it on phones, tablets, and desktop computers. There was a 50% reduction in the time spent on sales enablement. So they had an existing flow of sales enablement training. It involved sitting down and taking a half hour, an hour to take a module in e-learning. They were able to get that time down by 50%. As well, they've got 20,000 employees using resources just in time at any location. So on the job, out in the field, on the way to different places, and they're able to consume this content. And the biggest thing that we found reported back was that employees truly did feel this learning portal sits on their home page, on their intranet. They see it every day, and they feel that they're more confident to act as brand ambassadors for Comcast. So back to you, Lori.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Micah. Fantastic information. And at this point, I'm going to invite both of our speakers to walk us through some considerations and best practices and takeaways on what we went over today. And speakers, I'm going to ask that we keep it at a pretty high level so that we can have time to address some of the great questions that are coming into the queue. So over to you, John.
Thanks, Lori. So the first recommendation is to start small but think big. What we found was effective was to pick projects that were big enough to make a difference in the organization, but small enough that we could manage them and give them the attention to be successful. At the same time, we thought bigger in terms of how we would scale mobile within the organization. So while we were working through prototypes and issues around user experience and what content worked best, we're also thinking about how we would integrate with our LMS to make sure that the record keeping and operation aspects of enabling mobile were something that could scale to the level of training we do in our organization, which includes literally hundreds of thousands of assignments a year. Second piece is I recommend doing proof of concepts to understand what works well for your user population, then do a prototype, and then test and revise. We learned an awful lot from testing with a population that was cross-functional in our organization. So we included people from our network operations, from the sales organization, and from corporate groups. So we had about 100 people involved in the prototype. We tested different kinds of content to find out which content worked best and the kind of content that our learners preferred. And then we made quite a few revisions. So we learned a lot from asking users, and we gave them a pretty comprehensive survey. It was about 20 plus questions to have them tell us what they thought of the experience. Third thing we did was integrate with our LMS. So we knew early on that if we started using mobile technology and wanted to track progress, we wanted it to be tracked back to one system of record. So we built an integration with our LMS which in turn was integrated with our HMS and allowed us to not only manage course content and make sure we recorded completion status, but also enabled us to manage our mobile users. So when people left the organization, their access to content was removed as well. Next thing on the list is thinking about performance support and reinforcement versus structured learning. So I would encourage you to think about how you can use mobile devices as a way of providing access to content and reference information, and not just a way to deliver e-learning courses. Because most people want a quick answer to a simple question. Secondly, mobile is good for assigning content out, but it's also great for people that just want an answer. So think about how you can enable people to pull information from a database, from a knowledge repository, or even from a course catalog, versus thinking strictly in terms of how to push content out to them. And the last thing would be think about how you want to create awareness within the organization of the new capabilities. So I think you need to think a little bit about a marketing plan that make people aware of what's now available to them, detail around how they can access that content or sign up, and then have a support plan in place. In our case, we had kind of 2 tiers of support. We worked with our IT help desk to support users with basic things like basic device compatibility, as well as password resets and things like that. And then we had a second tier, which was supported by the learning group. And that tier answered questions that people had specifically about content or questions specific to the mobile app that we had deployed. So we planned that in advance and wanted to make sure that we had it staffed sufficiently so that when people came on board, they'd have a good experience. And then the last thing I'll add is that we did have some specific hand-holding for leadership within the organization, make sure that they had a good experience and would be supporters of the program. So, Micah, I think you can take a couple of the others.
Okay, for sure. So I'll just touch very briefly. Working with large sets of existing e-learning, and repurposing any of your existing content. If you've built large tracks of e-learning and different content in Flash, all's not lost. We do have a really great infographic that shows some pathways and some ways to think about that existing content. So repurposing is definitely can be a best practice, so that all's not lost if you have this giant library, you're not sure how to get it on a mobile. But definitely thinking about mobile first, just like in the web design field, websites are built as mobile first, so goes with e-learning. And another thing would be, for a best practice, definitely responsive design. When we talked about Comcast Portal, like we said, we had one project that had many different outputs, designed for devices that may not even exist yet. If you have a device agnostic responsive design, you'll be able to have coverage now and in the future. So that contrasts against, perhaps doing different versions of the project, one for tablet and then another for phone, another for desktop. Getting that sort of holy grail, that one responsive design is definitely an exciting prospect.
All right. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. I'm going to give both of you just a moment to get a sip of water while I share with folks a couple of items on where to continue the learning or some next steps. You certainly can find CGS Learning on Twitter at #CGS Learning. And I know they'd love to see you out there, so go ahead and reach out. Also, I encourage you to request a complimentary mobile readiness assessment where you can speak with an expert on how to jumpstart your organization's specific strategy. So that's another great resource that's available to all of you on the webinar today. And also would like to invite you all to review the infographic that Micah just referred to. That includes the 5 key questions to ask around mobile. So with that, I will ask both of our speakers to step back to the virtual podium, if you will. And this first question is going to go out to you, John. And Bill's asking, what are the security considerations associated with mobile learning?
Well, I think a number of things come to mind. One is controlling user access, and then controlling the data throughout the entire process. So in our case at Cricket, we used a mobile app that actually was installed onto the phone, like you would install any app using the App Store or the Play Store at the Android OS. And so what you wanted to be able to do, what we want to be able to do is be able to remove users' access to the app and remove access to the content if they were to leave the company or leave one of our dealers. So it's important to be able to control which users have access and not end up with content that might be sitting out on the device without the ability to remove it. So that's one aspect of security. Also, it's important to make sure that the way it's encrypted on the phone is such that people can't get access to it from outside the app. So we encrypt the content on the device. We also encrypt the content as it's being sent to the device, and the information that comes back from them to us, such as completion status, is data that we also encrypt. And then, of course, we want to make sure that it's secure in a secure data center where it's stored. In our case, we had two locations. One, which was kind of an LMS for the mobile system itself, and then that transmitted data to the secure site where our LMS was housed and hosted. So hosting facilities need to be secure as well. But looking at the entire chain, I think, is a way to think about it to make sure that you're confident that any proprietary data doesn't get into the wrong hands.
All right, Micah, I'm going to go over to you. Jess is asking, how did you overcome the obstacle of Android versus Apple? How did you develop mobile if you have both platforms? And are they the same, or do you have to develop two separate platforms?
Yeah, so that's a sizzler of a question, right? So when you get into doing this stuff, when you get into do the e-learning development, there is always the variances between the two major platforms in mobile. That's even before you start looking at BlackBerry, Windows Phone, which are sort of like the niche player. But definitely in our case, how do we overcome? We definitely delivered some of the key messaging and key material as video. So going to video is you'll never get fired for going to video because, as John mentioned earlier, all devices treat video as a first-class citizen. So when you look at the YouTubes or the Lynda Learnings, the massive video instruction based. Now the key there is what do you do about interactivity, the pedagogically sound content? So we use off-the-shelf tooling, and we also have our own frameworks. We do use Articulate Storyline 2, which has a tablet output, and the new version number 2 does have an Android compatibility factor that was missing. You get mileage varies, so you really have to test your content, test your development, because you will get disappointed time to time by off-the-shelf tools. There's not a magic bullet that goes out to all the different factors, but we find that we can get there. We got there with Storyline, with a lot of tweaking and a lot of tribal knowledge that we accumulated. But we don't want to recommend building different platforms because a responsive device-agnostic approach works really the best because there might be new devices in the future that you haven't even considered yet. So look at like what how Netflix thinks. They support over 250 different hardware profiles, and their engineering team says, there'll be 100 more devices next year. We don't want to have to think on a case by case. If you developed an e-learning platform and did a specific Android rollout and a specific iOS rollout, you're going to get very expensive. It's going to be very unwieldy to maintain. So device agnostic is a great way to position. I will say when you're trying to consider different ecosystems like that, the lower power the framework, meaning the less bells and whistles, the better, because especially with Android and maybe some older iPhones, there's definitely like some low power devices out there that will have trouble with interactive content.
All right, well, thank you. And Shelley is asking, were the phones and tablets provided by the company?
Yes, great question. So going back to the Comcast case study, they did roll out and deploy 6,000 iPhones and I believe 14 or 24,000, I forget now, iPads. Now, they did a mixture. They provision devices on a large scale. They also have BYOD. So in that 80%, that was employee base wide. Okay, so that was 80% not of the provisioned users, but 80% of the entire workforce. So Comcast, in Comcast's specific case, they are provisioning out thousands of iOS devices, but they definitely, it was a BYOD for some of their mission critical training, so it was a mixture.
Okay, and John, what are the steps involved in rolling out mobile?
Okay, I think we actually have a graphic for that. If we could put that up, I'll walk through what we did.
Okay, that should be showing right now, so feel free to go ahead and talk to it.
The first thing we did was a proof of concept with a pilot and an evaluation. And I talked a little bit about that. We gathered a lot of data, not just on the user experience and what content worked best, but also compatibility with different devices. So we got on top of compatibility issues very early on and solved, I would say, 95% of those before we went to the initial rollout. Then we rolled it out to our sales organization, focusing on some of the product training that they have to go through on a regular basis. Once we had gotten that working correctly, then we did an integration with our LMS. And in our case, we used a mobile platform that had its own LMS, which was really helpful. So we actually built an integration between that LMS and our LMS for everything else, which was really our system of record. It happens to be the Oracle Learn platform. But point being that it did two things. One, it captured all the mobile activity and completion status. And so when somebody would complete a course, it would go back to the mobile LMS, and then that night the data would pass back to the system of record, the overall LMS. In addition, if we had changes in user status, if employees left the company or employees joined the company, that data would go into the mobile LMS, and they would automatically be provisioned with an account for mobile access, or their access privileges were removed, depending on the situation. So the LMS integration was really key to automate that, because when you have tens of thousands of assignments going out and being tracked, it's important that we can track completion status regardless of whether somebody completed on a mobile device or on a desktop. Then we began to enhance the experience with different kinds of activities, and one quick example is enabling people to actually dial into a website with any kind of phone. They could actually answer questions. The system would record their answer, score it, and then make the recordings available to instructors and managers who could give feedback to the employee. So that was an enhanced capability to provide feedback on real-time responses to selling and customer service situations that was really helpful for our new hires. And then the last thing we did was begin to extend it to other kinds of content and broaden it into other departments within the company. So that's the way we approached it. It's going to be different for every company, but that was what we found worked well.
All right, and I think we're going to go to our last question here. I'm going to start this question with John, and then I'll bring it over to Micah. And the question is, you mentioned that you found what content worked best. So what type of content would that be? So over to you.
Well, we find that content that's short and concise, number one, is a good fit. So we tried to make sure that any modules that we built or any videos that we presented were 4 minutes or less. And so sometimes that meant segmenting existing content into shorter chunks. We also found that video content worked well because it was easy to play back. And we also found that sort of foundational content was very good. When we looked at things like systems training, if we were training people on systems that had a lot of detail, actually on newer smartphones, it works pretty well, especially depending on how you record the simulations for systems training. If your simulations can zoom in on parts of the screen, then viewing that content on a mobile device actually works just fine. So making sure that you you use the capture software properly, means that you can do simulation work and still deliver to a mobile device. But generally speaking, if I were to call out one thing that was a little bit more of a challenge, it would be systems training, in which you had to look at a lot of detail on a screen and you're viewing it through a lower resolution mobile device. Those are the ways we thought about it. Obviously, things like role plays that are done in an instructor-led format have some limitations in terms of how you execute those role plays. But when it comes to foundational content, product knowledge, general systems knowledge, we actually found that mobile was very capable across all those content areas.
Okay, Micah?
All right. Well, I would definitely second those observations. Video content, again, with all mobile devices, like a marquee feature is being able to view video content. So you can't go wrong with video. If you can make that video interactive, there's new technology out there, and CGS builds technology where you can have video with overlays that allow you to pick and choose and make choices, and then another video will play, or the video will continue in a different format. Those are really exciting, and there's actually some really great innovation where you can get phone-based displays to do this as well. So those are some really interesting things. But again, there is a lot of multimedia constraints and considerations. Definitely for L&D industry, for people that build e-learning content, you cannot necessarily build your e-learning the way that you might have, pre-2010, or in the last couple of years, because even with the latest iPads and the latest Androids, there's a lot of different lockdowns and different considerations and constraints. So we think that content that definitely engages via simple interaction works very well. Whereas you used to have maybe like a giant array of different choices and wheels to turn, we've definitely simplified. We found that the mobile paradigm, much like when you have interactive magazines, simple interactions where you touch and you swipe, you don't want to confuse people or turn them off by having things be too difficult. So we found that content's really focused itself. It's shorter. It's very focused. Interaction is simpler, but it's pleasing. And it's definitely still engaging. So with those kinds of thoughts in mind, the content that you develop can be very successful.
All right. Well, all excellent advice, gentlemen. Thanks so much. Folks, we are at that time, and I'd like to take a moment to thank each of you for joining us today, and hope you found today's webinar to be of value and that you'll want to join us for some future events. Again, special thanks to our guests today, John Moxley, Micah White, and for our sponsor today, CGS Learning. And as your moderator, this is Lori Dearman saying thank you and have a great rest of the week. Goodbye for now.